20 MacBooks, and that's just the basic configurations. That's the choice now, and buyers of Apple laptops face a challenging decision. What seemed obvious after the first generation of M-chip laptops is now anything but clear. Apple has made some models less appealing to drive the sales of the other ones. Some colors are a really bad decision, and more than that, the differences between M1, M2 and M3 chips are unclear in real-life usage, and it's not easy to tell when these laptops become outdated. And the main question is, are any of the Apple chip MacBooks really becoming obsolete? Let's quickly and clearly break down how to make the right choice. My name is Gene, and I'm here to help you decide which MacBook to choose. Let's go. Air versus Pro versus Real Pro. Apple likes to keep its product lines simple, and currently there are just two main categories of laptops: Air and Pro. The Air line is designed for not overly demanding users or those who specifically want an ultra-thin and light laptop. These models always have a dimmer 60Hz screen and lack internal cooling fans, which means they can lose performance over time due to overheating during intensive tasks. The speakers and microphones are usually not as good either. However, the line of Air has three undeniable advantages. First, it offers incredible battery life, enough for most people to get through a full workday and sometimes even two. For example, the latest Air can last up to 18 hours when playing videos. The second advantage is their smaller size and lighter weight. The weight difference might not seem huge on paper, but in reality it's far more substantial, especially if you carry your laptop in a backpack. The third advantage, which is also a drawback, is the absence of cooling fans. This means the Air will never make noise, because nothing inside is able to make noise. People often think that the Air line isn't as cool as the Pro, but in reality it's far more popular. Most people don't need the bump in performance or 120Hz screen that the Pros offer. What they really need, though, is the smallest and lightest laptop possible. So it's no wonder the Air models have many more buyers. Even on an M1 processor from 4 years ago, you can easily work with photos and videos and manage numerous tabs, especially with 16 gigs of unified memory, and the system runs super fast too. That's usually all that most people would ever need. Of course, it's also good for watching movies. And I won't even start on the M2 and M3. The Air is the choice of the majority, and there's a very high chance it's the best choice for you too. In terms of power, it's pretty simple with Airs. The bigger the number in the processor's name, the more power. So M2 is more powerful than M1 and M3 is more powerful than M2. Each generation is about 25 to 30% more powerful than the previous one. And while the difference between M1 and M2 isn't very noticeable, the M3 in some cases will be 50 to 60% more powerful than the M1. That means a significant increase in performance. The Pro line in turn should be divided into Fake Pro and True Pro. And now it's very important to pay attention not to the model's name, because they all say MacBook Pro, but to the name of the chip. Fake Pro laptops are shipping with the same chip inside as the Air. So if you see a MacBook Pro for sale with an M2 or M3 chip without the Pro suffix, remember they are significantly reduced compared to other MacBook Pros, and in some cases even compared to the MacBook Airs. So I strongly advise against buying Pro models with regular M chips without the Pro suffix. They are made to use up outdated casings left in stock and are generally not worth it compared to other MacBooks. We'll explore this more with each model. But truly Pro MacBooks, they have Pro written both in the model's name and the chip's name. If the Apple chip's name is M1 Pro, M2 Pro or M3 Pro, then these are genuinely professional machines. If the chip's name has Max instead of Pro, then it's an even more powerful machine in terms of performance. Learn and remember, if you're buying a MacBook Pro, only choose ones with M Pro or M Max processors. They have far more features compared to the Air. They have much better performance, graphics, speakers, cameras, microphones, and improved mini LED screens, where blacks are truly black. However, they are also larger and significantly heavier. Apple adds further confusion by updating laptops about every 1.5 years, and sometimes even a few times a year, and in many cases stops producing previous generations. Currently, Apple considers the relevant models to be Air on M2 and M3, just the 13-inch on M2 and both 13 and 15 on M3, and Pro on M3, M3 Pro and M3 Max. That's 9 laptops, but since nearly all models starting from M1 are still for sale and are often still relevant, and furthermore many are sold used on websites for used tech, we'll talk about all of them in order, even those that Apple no longer produces. MacBook Air and MacBook Pro with M1. These are the first MacBooks with an Apple chip inside. They are considered outdated by Apple, but in reality they still have a lot to offer. Their power is 2 to 8 times higher than the previous generation of MacBooks from the same year. Everything rolls very quickly and the computer wakes up instantly. You can work with photos and videos, texts and numerous tabs, though graphic-intensive tasks might not be as smooth. The laptop comes with 2 Thunderbolt ports, the brightness is 400 nits. By today's standards, the design feels a bit dated. It has a tapered body, no MagSafe charging, but it does have Touch ID. Performance under extended hard use drops by 15%, which isn't critical. There's no 15-inch model, just this small one, with a base of 256 gigs of storage and 8 gigs of unified memory. While the storage may be sufficient for many, the memory might not be. I recommend opting for 16 gigs if you can. The MacBook Pro with the same M1 chip on the other side is different in 4 ways. First, it has a fan inside, meaning it won't throttle its performance at all. Second, it includes a touch bar, which adapts to each application and displays relevant controls. Some find this convenient, but I don't. I can never remember where everything is, and it ends up taking more time to look at the touch bar and find items than to do things the old-fashioned way. So in my view, this is a drawback, though fortunately you can customize it to view the usual buttons. Third, it has 100 nits more brightness, which is noticeable but does not change the game. And fourth, its form is less convenient, and it's thicker and larger than the Air. If you're considering a Pro model with a standard M chip, this one might actually be a good option. For example, if you're looking for something with an M1 and the right memory configuration happens to be in a Pro model and there's no available Air. It doesn't have any special drawbacks besides the touch bar, having an internal fan and a bit more brightness definitely won't hurt, and the verdict: M1 machines are suitable for not overly heavy tasks, especially in a 16 gig unified memory option, but only if you're sure that you need a small screen and brightness of Air is not a priority for you. An important point: the M1 machines are not able to connect more than one external monitor. Technically they can, but through a big workaround, and I'm not sure you'd want to deal with that. As I said, M1 laptops are considered outdated by Apple as it no longer manufactures them, so finding them after a while might be difficult or even impossible. But these are the cheapest Macs, and they are really cheap for the standard Mac price. MacBook Air and MacBook Pro with M2. The main update for this one is the design. The laptop has forgotten its tapered form, becoming thinner than the thickest part of the Air M1, and just feels very slim and light. MagSafe has finally returned, freeing up the second Thunderbolt port. Still, all laptops with MagSafe can also be charged using USB-C, so you're not forced to use magnetic cables. The Touch ID design has been improved. Additionally, the brightness has increased to 500 nits, and now there's an abomination: a notch. But the screen has gotten larger. Speakers now are in the hinge, making them slightly less loud, but on the bright side, the side mesh by the keyboard disappeared. There's a new webcam with slightly better quality. Overall performance has improved by an average of 30%, but the laptop still reduces performance by 15% in processing tasks and up to 30% in graphics tasks. A new color, Midnight, has appeared, which looks very beautiful at first glance, but very soon gets covered in fingerprints that you'll constantly need to wipe off. Better to choose other colors, in my opinion. Sometime later, a 15-inch version of the MacBook Air was introduced. Naturally, the dimensions changed. The screen area is 26% larger and it's 20% heavier, but that's not all. 6 speakers instead of 4 ensure better sound, and 10 graphics cores even in the base configuration provide additional performance. There's no significant difference in throttling or battery life compared to the 13-inch models. Now, what's new in the MacBook Pro on M2? Just the chip. Literally everything else remains the same as in the M1 Pros. No MagSafe, no new camera, no larger screen. That's why there's really no point in getting a MacBook Pro on M2. There's also a catch. In the base configuration on the M1, there were 2 memory chips, 128 gigs each, but in the M2 there's just one chip of 256 gigs. This reduces the bandwidth in the base M2 model by half, causing everything to lag terribly under heavy multitasking. Therefore, do not choose the base configuration of the M2, both Air and Pro, if you plan to do anything more than work with text. It would be better to at least opt for a config with 8 gigs of RAM and 512 gigs of storage, or 16 gigs and 256 gigs. This is how Apple managed to make the new laptop somewhat better, but somewhat worse. And yes, the base configurations of the M2 are still like this. Apple hasn't fixed that. The MacBook Pro on M2 has technically become outdated too and is no longer produced, although you can still find it, but I really wouldn't recommend buying it. The Air on M2, however, has become cheaper and it's still being produced. It's definitely worth buying, both the 13-inch and the 15-inch versions, just not in the base configuration. In terms of price, though, it's still not as sweet as M1 options. MacBook Air and MacBook Pro with M3. These are some of the newest and most relevant laptops available. A crucial update is the return of 2 memory chips in the base models. So even the cheapest M3 Airs won't lag like the M2s. Of course, upgrading to 16 gigs of unified memory is still better, but even with 8 gigs, performance is good thanks to dynamic caching, which allows applications to use exactly as much memory as they need. The Midnight color has been improved to show fewer fingerprints, but they are still very much noticeable. Support for dual monitors has been added, though only when the lid is closed, along with Wi-Fi 6E support. Performance has improved by an average of 25%, but the laptops will throttle by about the same amount. Still, they are more powerful than the M2 models. In other things, the laptops are very similar. But the Pro on M3 has some serious issues. Yeah, it's got a total redesign. The chassis now much more closely resembles a true MacBook Pro. It includes an HDMI 2.1 port and an SD card reader. The brightness has been increased to 600 nits base and 1600 in HDR mode, and MagSafe also has been added. But all these improvements come at a cost. Now the Pro on M3 is priced at a steep $1,600. For that money you get 512 gigs of storage and still only 8 gigs of unified memory. If you want 16 gigs, you'll have to pay $1,800, which is a $200 difference from the M3 Pro, which is better at everything. The MacBook Pro on M3 is essentially a placeholder. Call it what you will, but it's best to avoid it if the price isn't significantly lower than the M3 Pro. The M3 Air is worth considering, but the price is steep, at least for now. For that money, I'd rather consider an M2 Air with a decent amount of memory, because there really aren't many differences. Or perhaps look at other MacBooks, like the True Pro models. MacBook Pro, M1 Pro or Max, and M2 Pro or Max. Why are these four laptops in one category? Because they are very similar. Their specs are significantly better than those of the Air models. They come in 14 and 16-inch sizes, with screens offering 500 nits of brightness, enhancing up to 1600 in HDR, and they provide a much nicer and more contrast-rich experience thanks to mini LED technology. They are equipped with 3 Thunderbolt ports, HDMI, MagSafe, and a card reader. The speakers are considerably better than Air's, and in terms of graphics, the standard M3 barely approaches the performance level of the M1 Pro, and that's not even in all tasks. If you need to perform intensive ones, the M1 Pro or M2 Pro is the right choice for you. If you also have graphics-intensive tasks, such as rendering videos or working on graphic design, or perhaps using graphics-intensive applications, then you should instead opt for the M1 Max or M2 Max. In terms of performance, the M1 Pro is on average 26% more powerful than the M3 when considering both CPU and graphics. It's 83% more powerful than the M1, almost double. Then the M2 Pro is about 20% more powerful than the M1 Pro. Regarding the Max versions of the M1 and M2, the CPU part is practically the same as the Pro ones, except for 2 additional cores compared to the base models. The graphics are much more powerful though, allowing the M1 Max to be on average 63% more powerful than the Pro, and the M2 Max to be 75% more powerful than the M2 Pro. This makes these ideal for working with graphics. The M2 Pro and Max models also include other improvements. For instance, HDMI 2.1 for connecting monitors at 120 Hz, Wi-Fi 6E, and slightly improved cameras. But there's a catch in the M2 Pro's base configuration. The disk speed is again considerably less than in the M1 Pro. But in real-life usage, this is not as bad as it sounds. These MacBooks are perfect options if you want solid performance without spending too much money. At the time of filming, you can find the M1 Pro in a used condition for the most reasonable price. New M2 Pros are likely to be priced much higher. The same applies to the M1 Max. For the M2 Max, be prepared to pay a frightening amount of money. MacBook Pro, M3 Pro and M3 Max. We finally reached the latest Pro models currently available. Here's how things are. The M3 Pro isn't dramatically more powerful than the M2 Pro, only about 13%, but it's significantly more energy efficient. While the M2 Pro retains only 13% of the battery, the M3 Pro holds 27%. This makes it a perfect choice for intensive work during travel or in places without easy access to power outlets. Additionally, the base brightness has now increased to 600 nits from 500. The M3 Pro no longer stands out as much in terms of performance. Previously, the Pro and Max models shared the same processor, differing only in graphics. Now the M3 Max has differences in both the CPU and graphics components, because Apple is pushing the pricier model more aggressively. The processor in the M3 Max is almost 60% better, and the graphics are nearly 80% better. This model is a powerhouse now approaching the capabilities of the M2 Ultra. In this case, there's little need for recommendations. Those considering the M3 Max MacBook know exactly why they need it. What to choose and the price paradox. Remember earlier in the video I said the MacBook Air is for less demanding users or those who value size and weight. Here's the catch. In many configurations, the MacBook Air can cost as much as, if not more, than the MacBook Pro. And we're talking about the real Pros with M Pro chips, not the fake Pros. For example, if you configure an Air with M2 to 16 and 512 gigs, you'll find it's barely cheaper than a MacBook Pro with M2 Pro, with the same amount of memory and storage. Unexpected for sure, and of course the Pro will be better in almost every aspect, except possibly in size and weight. Apparently Apple values these features quite highly, so I will look at the market situation from the perspective of the price to value ratio. The M1 MacBook Air in its base configuration is perfect for those who want to use it as a typewriter or for minimal work, simple photo editing, beginner-level video editing, even in 4K, browsing with a moderate number of tabs and not overloading the storage. And yes, this laptop hasn't aged yet. Maybe its design somewhat has, but not its performance. If you decide to spend more, you're facing a choice between the MacBook Air on M2, not the base model, maybe with more unified memory or a larger disk, and the MacBook Pro on M1 Pro and M2 Pro. Again, it depends on what's really important to you. If you care about performance, ports, better speakers, an enhanced screen with true blacks and 120 Hz, a card reader, then go for the M1 Pro or M2 Pro in 14 or 16 inches, whichever size you prefer. The 14-inch is perfect for travel and daily commutes, while the 16-inch is better suited for stationary work and infrequent movements. If you work with video, opt for the M1 Max or M2 Max instead, which feature 2 encoders and decoders, speeding up rendering. The same applies if your work involves graphics. In this case, it would be a good thing to consider the Mac Studio, especially if you work from a fixed location and don't move the computer around. If you want latest and greatest, but you know that portability is more important to you than performance and other features, go for the new Airs. Preferably the M2 over the M3 because of the price, but make sure it's not the base model. Ideally at least 16 and 512. If you've chosen the Air, performance is not your top priority, obviously, but memory and storage are something you will need. The 15-inch model works for travel, while the 13-inch is the perfect size to minimize the feel of carrying a laptop. Perfect for use beside your bed or if you have back issues but need to carry a bag. Some people move around offices all day from meeting to meeting, and for them the 13-inch is just right. I'd strongly advise against Pro models with standard chips, except for the Pro on M1. The Pro on M2 is merely an attempt to use up old chassis. The Pro on M3 costs $1,800 for a decent memory configuration, which is just $200 or 11% less than the M3 Pro that outperforms in every aspect, such as having 2 fans inside instead of 1, an additional Thunderbolt port, and better graphics. And you might sometimes find even the M2 Pro for the same price as MacBook Pro on M3. And definitely avoid MacBooks with Intel chips. Regarding memory, many say that 8 gigs is not enough, and I partially disagree. 8 gigs is sufficient if you have an M1 or M3. Just don't choose the base model for the M2. If you aren't planning to fully load up the laptop, opening a few browser tabs and editing a photo, 8 gigs will be enough for that. In such cases, the laptop will utilize swap, supplemental memory to help the unified one, which isn't critical at low loads, although it might wear out the disk a bit faster. However, I'm not sure you'll notice this within the next 5 or so years. There's another issue: memory and storage aren't upgradable. If you buy 8 gigs of unified memory, the only way to upgrade it is to sell your laptop and buy a new one, which isn't very convenient. So if it's possible to save up some money and get at least 16 gigs, that would be better. As for storage, in my case 512 gigs is the minimum, since I need to work with files, and a necessary minimum of applications takes up quite a bit of space on the laptop. Please comment below on which specific MacBook you would buy and why. It will be interesting to read. Don't forget to like if the video was helpful, subscribe to the channel and share it with friends who are also struggling to make a choice. Maybe we'll go on to make more videos. Take care. Bye.